At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Tom, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Dr. Doug. How are you?
Hey, good. It's great to have you on the show. You know, it's fascinating to me how life experiences bring us to a certain point in our lives, and how some people have been able to overcome those experiences and others are still struggling with those experiences. And you've written a book called Punishment to Peace, which in my mind is just an amazing title. I'd love for you to share with the audience just briefly, and then we'll get into things a little bit more. But what motivated you ultimately to write this book?
Well, again, thank you, Dr. Doug, for being on your show. I appreciate that. That's the question I think that I think about a lot. In that, I spent an incredible amount of my life thinking that I'm supposed to live a life a certain way. And I was trained to do that from my youth. And so I woke up one day and really it was a confluence of several things. Three things happened that said, I've got to go on a journey. And the journey was the first step towards writing the book. But the journey itself came from an awakening that my business partner and I decided to close the business down that we had. And thus I didn't have an office to go to. And then my second marriage failed, so I didn't have a home to go to. And then the obsession that I had to prove myself, in search of my father's love, he passes away. And so all of this of living the life, trying to prove myself, and ended up falling into some addictions of not the illegal kind, but others. Put me in the direction of saying, I've got to find another way to find who Tom Harrison is. That I had a hole in my soul, basically. And so I reconnected with a childhood, a family member, a same age uncle, and that we grew up very close together, but went in diametrically different paths. And we both grew up in abuse. And so it was the start of that journey, and really the eye-opening experiences that I learned from that uncle that said, this is a story that it cannot just be something that this person and myself experienced, that there is something very meaningful potentially in what we would go through. And so I started recording it, and one thing led to another, and I began to write it.
Well, and you know, it's so fascinating that we all go through different experiences in our lives, and some people allow that to cause them to move into a victim mode that they're never able to get out of. And then there are others that, you know, and we're going to get into this more, I know, but, you know, such as yourself, that was able to take that, go through a journey and literally write about it, which, you know, if you're able to write, or as you recorded and then it was written, but being able to do that, it not only affected you, but it's going to affect hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of lives who will read that and realize that, guess what? There's hope. You know, as I mentioned to you, I'm over here in Thailand right now. And so I've been, you know, doing a lot of different studying and so forth. And one of the things every once in a while, and not all the time, but every once in a while, I sit back and think, you know what? I feel such peace. Why is that? Now, obviously, then I lose that. But every once in a while. And so the name of your book, From Punishment to Peace, really hit me, because I think for all of us, the ability to ultimately feel peace in our lives is something that is not only hoped for and desired for, but should be the goal for all of us. So what I'd love for you to do is, let's go back to the beginning. I'd like you to share your story and really talk about what you went through, and then as you met and worked with this relative, talk a little bit about that. And what I find fascinating, you know, you said he went down one path, you went down a different path. And it's interesting that your path was, as you say, motivated by the things that you experienced in your childhood. So I'd love for you to just get into that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, the story actually starts when a man is 33. He was a devout Christian. I mean, he had Jesus Saves on his delivery truck. I mean, he wore his faith prominently. He was 33. He died from a DUI accident. Someone hit him and hit his gas tank and exploded. And he left behind a widow and four children, ages 1 through 14. And that really was the start of this whole list of things that are a line of things that ended up happening. And the point here is that the two characters would have never been born if that man hadn't died. And that's, to me, so profound to begin a story that way. But these two, the main characters, they were kids that every set of parents would love to have. They were good-hearted kids. They tried to please. They had the manners, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, both kids grew up with highly abusive fathers. So that widow remarried, had a fifth child, which is the uncle character. His name is John. And he had and his father had a very deep, dark past too, which was divulged in the book. And he was physically abusive. He ended up molesting his stepsisters, John's half-sisters. It was just a very disruptive childhood for him. And then the other character, myself, the oldest daughter, ended up having a child at 16 with my father, who was, and looking back, was bipolar. He had some very severe issues himself, highly narcissistic. And so he didn't do the physical abuse, but he did heavy emotional abuse growing up. And so if you can imagine these two household environments for the first 18 to 20 years of your life, having to be scared of whether you're going to get beaten or whether you're going to be your legs cut out from under you emotionally almost constantly. And it was a challenge. And so for both of these characters, they had to figure out how to evolve into adulthood with that as their part of their DNA. And so for John, he started physically soothing early with, started drugs and alcohol at 13 and became dependent on both for virtually all of his life. Was homeless most of his life, was in and out of the judicial system in 5 different states at least 4 dozen times. And so he struggled with life. He certainly did. For the nephew character, myself, I somehow got a college education. I barely got into college and began to feel success and some form of recognition, something which I did not have in my first 20 years. And so I became really kind of focused on that, and I became an overachiever. So one job that wasn't good enough, there had to be a higher paying job. And if that higher paying job had a better title or a better location or with a better company or I had to move across, I ended up moving across the country 4 times. I become addicted to success. And as a result of that, Dr. Doug, I became addicted myself to materialism, to hedonism, and again, back to success for success sake. And unfortunately, both characters left a wake behind them. With anyone that came along us during our journey, we were not the easiest people in the world to be with. And translation to that is the punished of the 2 characters were punished in their youth, became basically punishers themselves.
Well, and and I want to interrupt you for just a minute here, because it fascinates me that, we talk about how some people with that tremendous abuse end up into drugs and homelessness and so forth, which, that story in itself, as you think about that, and as we think about all of the homeless people in the world, and sometimes there's so much distaste for them, and yet we really don't understand what was behind them being where they're at. Now,
right.
in your case, you sought success, which I think we all do to a certain degree. But what did you find as you look back? What did you find that success was doing for you from the standpoint of pushing aside or covering up? Because I want to use the word covering up rather than acknowledging, because it sounds to me like that's what you were talking about, covering up those earlier years. What was that success doing for you mentally that covered up those earlier years that made you feel better? And then, as you say, you got into some other issues.
Well, thank you for that question. And that's so important, is that for me, I let the idea that one house wasn't enough. Here, Dad, see that I've got now a second home, a vacation home, or maybe a third home, or a new car this year. The euphoria associated with, and we all have it, the euphoria of a great meal or a new car buy or something that we've done, a great trip. It's great and it's fine and it's rewarding, but it's fleeting. And going back to that term of peace, euphoria and peace are completely, they are like almost in opposite directions as to what they are. And in this case, because I had this obsession to prove my father wrong, I was doing everything I could to raise that bar inside me to prove to him that I was worthy of his love. And unfortunately, I could never get that high. I could never hit that mark because of his challenges. He couldn't accept, he was not capable, given his upbringing and who he was. He couldn't accept that. And so he went through 6 marriages. And so there lies, I think, a lot of, again, something I learned in my youth. I wanted to be the antithesis of my father in many cases. And so I said, I'm only going to be married once. I'll end up now my third and last marriage. Dr. Doug, believe me, that's it. But I think we tried. So for me, I spent all my life trying to figure out how to please a man that couldn't be pleased, and I did everything I could around that. And yet, again, the euphoria of what I was doing to myself with my successes was still leaving me a big hole in who I was. I was still searching. And not knowing what to find. And that was really, I think, the most frustrating for the people around me, the people that cared about.
Well, and then you had the experience of meeting your uncle, and from what you're saying, that really changed everything. I'd love for you to share with the audience that part of your story, and how did that come about, and what did that bring together?
Well, when I decided to kind of walk away from everything and say, I've got to find a better version of who I am. I don't know where to find it, but I got to start. I started by just picking off certain family members. And the one family member that I had to spend a little bit of time thinking about was my Uncle John in Memphis, back in Memphis in our hometown. And so we had not seen each other or talked to each other in 20 years. And admittedly, back to what you were saying earlier, Dr. Doug, we look at the homeless as though, well, you know what, they got themselves there. Many of them are on drugs. You can't get them off of it. You can give them money, but what are they going to do with it? That's always been the challenge, I think, for many of us trying to explore how to react or interact with homelessness. And this was no different in reconnecting with my uncle. I've always, lifelong, thought he deserved it. He was reckless. You can now change him. I just kind of washed my hands of it. But I thought, he has the knowledge. He has some knowledge of my past, of our past, of the connective tissue that would potentially help me and him. Admittedly, I kind of was a little bit more selfish. I wanted to feel better about myself, so I connected with him. We started with one meal, but then that turned into something amazing, Dr. Doug. It started a series of road trips, and the subtitle of the book is Road Trips to Forgiveness. And we started a series of what I've written 6 road trips where we reconnect and we began to peel the onion of who we were really, and bearing our most difficult moments, our most difficult things that have happened to us, and ultimately the pride that we were having and the recognition of the fact that we were doing damage to others, that began to come out. And getting back to the whole finish line of peace, peace is a finish line. And to get there, you have to take multiple steps. You have to take multiple road trips in our case. But the start of it is to really pull out of each one of us, and in particular during this story, who we were, why we ended up where we ended up, and then begin to figure out a way to solve that. To not necessarily solve it, but to soothe it. And if we could get to the point where we begin to forgive the wrongdoers, including ourselves, that could be the ultimate finish line to the pursuit of peace and shaking off the punishments of our past. So it was an amazing experience, and he was teaching me. And back to your question, he began to really show me a heart that I thought I had, but he continued to have during the most difficult life I've ever known of anybody in my life. And part of this journey was going back and having him reconnect with his father, who he hadn't seen in 4 years, who was in a nursing home back in the other side of the state of Tennessee. And I didn't know whether me facilitating that first connection after so long, John was going to do something physically bad to him or what. I didn't know what to expect. But what ended up happening was probably the most beautiful moment of my life. And I can share more, but there's part of it that I think I want to leave for anyone that might be interested in the book. But it was an amazing story.
Well, and one of the things you talk about in the book, I know, is the influence of others. I love to follow different people and what they say, and I'm following a couple of Buddhist monks. And one of the things that I picked up just the other day was he was talking about how we need to be so careful with the people that we surround ourselves with because of their influence, either for good or for not good. And I know that you talk, as a major theme in your book about the influence of others. Can you talk about that a little bit? And, what are some of those influences, and what are good, what's bad, and how do they affect us? And how do we allow them to affect us?
That's a good question. I think that Martin Luther King had a great quote. He says, life isn't about longevity, it's about quality. And I think the antithesis of quality is punishment. I think we all have our punishments. I got rejected by a date when I was an 18-year-old. I didn't like that. But luckily enough, I didn't carry that for the next 30 years. But some of those punishments, if we receive them early in our life, for long periods of our life, and from the people who are in control of our eating and our sleeping and a roof over our head, we carry those, I think, a lot deeper than any other punishment. And so how to address that is really important in the sense of, do we let influencers in general, anybody else, once we get to be an adult, we get to control who we let in our lives. And we were forced to have those people. We didn't get to choose who our parents were, or all the other influencers, good and bad, during our early years. But we do have somewhat of a choice as to who we let in. And when I say somewhat, we may fall in love with someone, and marry them, but they may not be the best person in the world for us in the long run. And I'm not advocating anything other than a one marriage society, but the point here is it's a challenge as to who you let in. And when you let in, you could be trapped into maybe being influenced by other people that aren't going to be a positive to you. But I was extremely fortunate to have both other family members and then mentors. What I didn't get from my father in that mentoring and that direction, I was almost hungry for in the search through my career. It was primarily for career focus. And it wasn't until the later years where I became more of a spiritual focused influencers. And once that hit, then really that's where everything started to kind of open up, and the horizon started to shine for me. But no doubt the challenge of what influencers can do to us, both positively or negatively, but then the huge positives can purely and so easily alter our life trajectory. trajectory, excuse me. And so we have to be careful. We have to be always monitoring that.
And how do you judge it? How do you literally judge what's going on around you, the people that you're surrounding yourself with, their quote influences, whatever that happens to be? How can you judge and say to yourself, this is a good influencer, and you know what, this one isn't a good influencer, and I need to distance myself or move away and disconnect from this influencer?
That's an incredible question. It's a very difficult question because I think a lot of people have, and I don't want to overuse this word, but clearly my father was a narcissist. I've studied narcissism quite a bit, and narcissists are extremely charming. They can be loving. In my dad's case, he had various different women decide to marry him. And that's a big step. And so they can be charming and sweet, but unfortunately, he also suffered from bipolar. And so you can see the other side of that. So it's not easy. It takes probably more iterations of understanding and of situations and circumstances happening to you. And it may be in some cases too late, but making the hard decision to kind of go, this isn't right. And understanding that, and understanding that if you get up every morning and you dread the day because there's someone, whether it be an employer, whether it be your spouse, whether it be even an adult child, if you sense and feel like you're being, like a better way of saying it, abused, you have to figure out a way to distance yourself first slowly, so you make sure that you don't completely break and make a big mistake. But once you realize that that's there, you have to make that hard decision and break away.
You know, and it's interesting. One of the things I find as I've interviewed a number of people and as I've studied and researched this out, I find that one of the most difficult aspects of someone's life that has gone through these challenges early on in their lives is to reach a point of awareness, to where all of a sudden they're able to sit back and go, you know what? I do not like my life. Because many people say, I don't like my life, but they don't do anything about it. But then there are those that suddenly go and they become aware that, you know what? This doesn't have to be this way. And quite frankly, I'm the one that can take responsibility to change it. So here's my question for you. What was was it one experience? Was there an aha moment for you? Or what was it that suddenly stopped you in your tracks in the direction you were going, and you said to yourself, I've got to change?
I think it was the divorce from my second wife. I was a product of a multi-divorced father. I knew the pain that exhibited, had to me, to others, but that just barely scratched the surface of the pain that I'm sure that existed all around that. And I wanted to be better than that. I strived to be better than that. From a very early age, I said, I want to be different than how my father has treated me and how my father treated others. And so to have experienced the first divorce was traumatizing, and that was on me. But the second one, it was on me too, of course, but it didn't have to happen. And I think that was the aha moment where I said, I'm lost. I had all this stuff. I had everything the world would want to give me, or I could ever have, physically. But I failed to have a connection, a spiritual and personal connection with someone that I cared deeply about, that they felt comfortable with me. They could see me as someone that will always be special in their life, and that they want to do life with me. And to have that feeling that someone didn't want to do that was terrifying for me. Terrifying, but also heartbreaking. And I said, I've got to stop. Whatever hamster wheel I'm on, I've got to shut it down, and I've got to find if there's another part of another version of who I am. And that wasn't easy because that means I had to resurrect things. I had to talk to a lot of people. People said, well, Tom, you did this once, or you did this all the time. And I had to start owning that. And that's the hardest part of all of this, Dr. Doug. And I'm sure you know that.
It is, and to be able, I mean, it really takes courage to own the personal responsibility. There's so many times that we can blame this person and that person and so on and so forth in this situation, whatever. But the reality is that we own it. If even if something comes to us in a certain way that we don't want, the reality is we probably have drawn that towards us because of those beliefs and what is literally motivating us. So we visualize ultimately what comes to pass. So the responsibility, I think, is so important to be able to say, okay, I've had enough. Now, the question that you keep bringing up the word spiritual. So I'd like for you to define for the audience what you mean by that spiritual connection.
Okay. I thought I was a Christian all through most of my life. I mean, I went to church. My grandparents took me to church. I went to school. I went to church when I was away to school on my own. I knew God was. I knew Christ was. I didn't know what the Holy Spirit was, but since I never knew it, I didn't really think much about it. I'd write checks to churches when they had fun, when they needed operating funds. But it was always off and on. And I made attempts to read the Bible. I probably made 12 attempts in my entire life to read the Bible. Never got out of Genesis. I couldn't get through all the begatting. I couldn't. My brain, which is an analytical brain, I couldn't make sense of the Bible other than certain verses. And so I really, even though I consider myself a Christian, really wasn't. And so to really go through the experience that I went through with my uncle, when he started attempting rehab, many of those are spiritual or Christian focused.
Yes.
And it's really something we want to hold on to something and really try to strive to reach that mark. And so for me, I latched on to a gentleman who ran a small groups ministry in Atlanta, and he had that. And Dr. Joe, we were talking about peace. He had the face of peace. And I think I've met maybe 5 people in my life, and you might be the 6th one now that I'm
like Thank you.
But I've met just very few people that had that look about them. And when I first met him, it was in a business environment. We were sitting together, and I said, and I was busy. I said, you know what? It was my business partner. He says, we're going to have a spiritual advisor in our firm. And I go, really? I'm your partner? You're not, and you're just now telling me that, and he's bringing in this guy into my office. I said, okay, I'll meet with him. And I was busy. I said, I don't think we've got time for God and this guy to be in our office because we're running a business. Of course, how stupid was that comment? But anyway, so he begins to kind of tell me about his ministry, and then really begins to tell me about his story. And his story, Dr. Doug, mirrored mine, where he was all focused on career and focused on trying to make the money. And he was neglecting his wife and children. And he had gotten to the point of close to being divorced. And he woke up one day, went to a silent retreat, which I don't know if you've ever been to a silent retreat, but you go for 2-3 days somewhere, usually in a monastery somewhere, and you'll say a word for 3 days. And you get fed, you go to bed, but it's between you and God, and that's it. And he said after 3 days of that, he came back and he started crying. He cried. He said, I hadn't cried since my mother's. He said he didn't cry at his mother's passing, at her funeral. He breaks down, and the next day he walks away from his Fortune 50 company high level career and starts his ministry. And he'd been doing it for about 15 years at the time. And I'll tell you, it was just I was not as much enamored by the fact that he had a ministry as much as 2 things. He had that peace, and his story resembled mine. And this was the opening, Dr. Doug, to my journey of saying, I need to be around people who can share with me and me share with them my stories, our stories, so that we can, as guys, well, we don't like sharing. So let's start with that. But as guys, we can begin to realize that we're not the only ones out there who didn't live up to dad's expectation, who may have gone through a divorce or two, who have a child that might be of a challenge, who have done things in the past that they wish they hadn't done. And once we begin to realize that we're not alone in that, that really opens up the floodgates of possibilities. And that's really what a lot of this book is about. You can see the floodgates opening for the John and Tommy in this, the two main characters in the book.
Well, and it's fascinating to me. You bring up something very interesting, and I think that it applies to many, not all, but to many people who go through the motions of being a good Jew, or being a good Christian, or being a good, Buddhist, or whatever that happens to be, and yet they don't really experience what you refer to, and I would refer to it also as that spirituality, being able to tap into that universal light of goodness and kindness and compassion, and which is literally taught in all of those various forms. And yet it takes that type of connection, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be Christian. I happen to be one too, by the way, but it doesn't have to be that. It only has to be something that you can connect to from the standpoint of really feeling that sense of spirituality, to where literally you're able to start moving into an entirely different section of your life. And the way you're thinking, the mindset that you have, the consciousness that you have is now being influenced by something entirely different.
I've got a great phrase that I love saying, and I'll share it with you. Those who devote themselves to themselves eventually lose themselves. And I think what we're talking about, this story exemplifies it. But I think what you're what you're accomplishing with what you're doing, it does the same thing, and that is we're turning ourselves from looking always within to kind of satisfy us who we are, and really begin to start looking outward. And if we can begin to look outward, then that's where we begin to feel much better about ourselves and can heal, and thus, I believe, get to peace.
And I think as we look outward in that arena, we begin to realize who we really are, and have an entirely different viewpoint of the goodness that each of us have. There's so many people that feel like they're no good, and that comes from the abuse, that comes from the childhood, whatever it happens to be. And yet, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all could really just sit back and realize, in spite of my faults, and we all have them, ultimately, I'm good. And when we have that understanding, that's going to totally change our behavior.
I think the journey of discovering that we are good, that we do not have to live like the way we've lived and how we felt about ourselves in the past, is an amazing journey. And I think it comes in steps. I'm going to share something that I kind of I locked myself in a room and really thought about this when I started receiving the question, what do you want readers to take away from reading the book? Mm-hmm. And I came up with something called the 5 R's of peace. And so the first, and it's right in line with what you were just saying. The first is you have to take the risks to do it. You have to wake up one day and go, I have to risk feeling uncomfortable to figure out why I've turned out the way that I've turned out. The second is reveal, whether it's to a priest or a spouse or a men's or women's small group or a complete stranger walking down the street, being able to pull out what you're carrying, those punishments you're carrying, and how they transgressed into what you've become, is extremely important to begin sharing. The third R is receive. So if you're in an environment where you're around others, be open to receive their thoughts, because that's when you're going to begin to understand that you're not alone in what you're doing and what you've been through. I mean, the fourth is respond. in those same kind of small group environments or people that you're working with, exercising the empathy muscle, meaning being there to potentially help others, is an amazing step, in my opinion. That's where you turn it from it's about me to about others. And when that turn happens, then the fifth R is reconcile, which is forgive your wrongdoers, including the wrongdoer of who you are. And if you can forgive those wrongdoers and forgive yourself and what you've done, you've hit that goal. You've hit that finish line of peace, in my opinion.
That's amazing. And when I was on your website, I found a quote in the video that runs, and I stopped it and I copied it and I pasted it because I thought it was such. Now I don't know if this is yours or whether you got this quote from someone else, but if it's okay, I'd like to read it. Peace and redemption can only occur by burying the past, finding compassion for wrongdoers, and forgiving ourselves.
Yep.
That is so powerful.
I don't take credit for that one, but anyway,
Good.
yes, no, it is so true. And if I had to sum up the entire book, the entire journey with my Uncle John, the entire cathartic 10 years it took to go through this experience and then ultimately put it into words, written words, it would be that line. It would definitely be that line. And I am a much better person. I'm a much better husband. I've learned to love much better than the superficial love of just saying, "Hey, I love you."
Yeah.
And so I think it's been a wonderful journey for both John and myself. It ended somewhat tragically, but it's an amazing ending no matter what. And it's just, it was a great journey.
So, one thing I find, and we all experience this, is we're out there really doing the best we can to improve the lives of others as well as ourselves. It's rare that we get the feedback that says, "Hey, that meant so much to me." And just every once in a while, I'll get someone that'll send me a message or call me and say, "Hey, that last interview you did on your podcast has really touched me in a positive way." So have you had that happen for people who have read your book? And can you share if there's any stories that you have of people that have responded back to you and said, "Thank you, because this has changed my life"?
I will give you two stories. One is a young lady who, and it's just been released about 3 weeks now. So it was actually the very first Amazon review, and she was just amazed at the power of how it affected her. And so I was just thrilled with that. Have that to be the first review immediately within a couple of days of release was just so empowering. But there is a story I'd like to share that's really, it's gut-wrenching, but yet it's amazing. And as part of writing the book and my journey with John, as I mentioned, his father, the stepfather of the other children, the oldest being my mother, she had passed away, so I couldn't investigate whether what may have happened to her. But the youngest of the daughters, my aunt, she was molested, and then there's a middle daughter who was still alive, lived close to me, and she was part of that. I want to figure out the family. I want to figure out why I ended up how I ended up. And I had it in me to ask her. I said, "So, did Woody, was the character? He's the antagonist character in the book. Did Woody molest you?" And I was just, I don't know where it came from. I said, "I know it happened to Carol. I know it's happened to others. Did it happen to you?" And she goes, "No." I go, I was thankful. I said, "That's great, Sue. I'm really happy about that." She didn't say another word. So, and I didn't want to get in the middle of it. I didn't want to go too deep. I just wanted to let it go. And she didn't really like the guy, obviously. So when I see her the next time, she says, "Tom, I want to tell you something. I lied to you." I said, "What?" She said, there was an incident, and she was stoic, but I went to tears. And she says, "Don't cry. It's been a while. It was a long time ago." And so we got over it. And then the next time I said, I got together, I said, she said, I never told my husband of 40 years that he passed away a couple of years prior. She said, I never told my husband. He says, and I need to tell you that by telling you, I've had the most amazing weight lifted off my shoulders. And I've never have felt this way in my life. And so she was so thankful that I took the bold, transparent step to point blank ask her if that happened to her. And she was able to kind of transition to turning that into something to where she was reaching towards a really peaceful point in her life. And I was blown away by that I didn't expect it. I didn't expect the original answer. I didn't expect the follow-up answer. I certainly didn't expect that she would come back and say that she had been changed and really felt such a relief from having exposed that.
Well, and I think it makes such a difference, number one, to admit it to ourselves, but then to be able to somehow admit that, whether it's in a writing or, a family member or a friend, and it just takes that pressure off. So this has been great, Tom, and I'm looking forward to getting your book. Is it also on Audible, or is it just strictly right now?
Not yet. We're considering going the Audible route, but right now it's available on Amazon, both Kindle and paperback. And then if anyone wants a version that's signed, the website, we can order through the website, both a hard cover and a paperback. But so we're just now figuring out what to do potentially with Audible. But we want to at least get a few weeks to a couple of months of activity going before we consider going up with that.
Fantastic. So as we're closing, what I'd love for you to do is take less than a minute and share with the audience what would be the message that you want to share with them as we close this interview.
Well, I think the only thing that I could really say, and is about as bold a statement as I can say it, is take the chance. If you're carrying a burden, whatever it is, call it a punishment. I call them punishments, but whatever burden that you're carrying, don't do it in silence, because, and especially guys, again, men are much more difficult to put themselves in position of opening up because they're afraid to be vulnerable to others. But in reality, vulnerability to me is strength beyond anyone's capacity, in my opinion. And so reach out and find someone or a group of people that can really help you address that, because that's going to be your path to peace, in my opinion.
Wonderful. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And again, folks, the name of the book, From Punishment to Peace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And folks, thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. And, if this resonates with you, get a hold of the book and really take the time to identify with characters that Tom uses, which is obviously himself and his uncle, and see how that can guide you and maybe encourage you to really start to seek that peace in your own life. This is Dr. Doug saying have a wonderful week, and thank you so much.